the Black History Now live series. My name is Jade Magnus Ogunaki, Vice President of Corporate Campaigns, Programs, and Research at Color of Change. Tonight, we are joined by Valerie Bowling. Valerie is an author, instructional coach, and public school educator of over 30 years. Her books have been featured in the Scholastic's Acorn Early Reader Series, and her debut picture book, Let's Dance, was honored with the Crystal Kite Award by the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. A graduate of Tufts University and Columbia University's Teachers College, Valerie is passionate about ensuring all students feel seen, heard, valued, and validated. Valerie, it's a pleasure to have you join us today.
Thank you so much, Jade. I'm happy to be here.
So, Valerie, you've been a public school educator for 30 years. Tell us why you decided to dedicate your life to education and teaching in public schools specifically.
I think, Jade, I've just always been a teacher. It's who I am naturally. I remember playing school with my cousins when I was younger, probably, 6, 7, 8, and I was always the teacher. Probably doesn't surprise you. And then even in my neighborhood, when I was an older elementary school student, I would gather people together first, the neighborhood children. We'd do our homework together before we went out to play. So it's just, as I said, naturally who I am. And I decided to become a public school teacher because I was actually deciding between social work and teaching. And I had worked in a youth hostel. I was a volunteer for a year in London, and I enjoyed the work very much. But I thought a number of these young people might not have ended up here if they had had a teacher along the way who had made a difference in their lives. And so I chose public school for that reason because generally they're a more diverse setting. They have more students from, racially different backgrounds. Some students struggle academically, socioeconomically, they're more diverse. And so that's why I chose to make my home in the public school system.
And thank you for your dedication to the public schools. 30 years is a really long time.
It is. Thank you.
You've moved on to become an author and an instructional coach. What sort of led or influenced that transition?
Well, the instructional coach part came first. And at that time, I was teaching eighth grade English in a middle school. Previously, I taught elementary school grades 2, 4, and 5. And my principal at the time in the middle school was working on a school-wide writing initiative, and she had some grant funds. And she said, I'd like for you to be a writing coach. And 2 days a month, you won't be in your classroom and you'll work with teachers. Teachers will sign up to work with you. And so that was how I kind of got started with coaching. And I really loved it, but it was the best of both worlds, Jade, because I was still a classroom teacher. So at the end of that year, when she told me she was going to become head of curriculum in our district and that she would have 2 coaching positions, and it strongly encouraged me to apply. I wasn't sure I was ready to leave the classroom, quite frankly. But because the position was designed to be a 1-year position, I felt, let me try it. And so I was an instructional coach in the middle schools and in the high school, working with teachers in all subject areas. So even AP Physics, which a lot of people who know me would say, how can Valerie help, or work with or collaborate with AP Physics teachers? It's because it's about the instruction. It's the instructional strategies. What are the teachers doing? What are the students doing? That's, what we work on. So I was not a content specific coach. So I've been doing that job. That's the role I'm currently in. I've been doing that job now for 13 of my 30 years. And then I, just a few years ago, became a children's author for the first time. My first book, which came out in 2020, I started writing children's books in 2017 because I was inspired by my young nieces, who are now this year turning 8 and 10. At the time, they were much younger, and they were visiting us. I was reading a lot of picture books to them. Each of them had inspired a picture book. And so I wrote those stories after they left. They'd been visiting us over the December holidays in 2016. And so in 2017, I said, let me just start to investigate and explore and see what it would take to maybe write a picture book, maybe get it published. It wasn't a strong dream or a desire, but it was more a let's look and see. And so I started writing, and I took a class, and I started querying, sending out some manuscripts. And Let's Dance was acquired by an editor in 2018. And that's why it was published in 2020, because it takes about 2 years for a picture book to be published. Sometimes it takes longer because you've got to find an illustrator. I don't do that, but the editor does. So an illustrator is starting from scratch with all of the illustrations. And so, yeah, so that was my first book. And then since then, I've been fortunate enough to have published more. I signed with an agent later that year, and he has gone on to sell 9 books for me, Jade. So I'm really fortunate.
Wow,
So now I'm
incredible.
actually a full-fledged author.
Well, congratulations. I noticed on the cover of Let's Dance, obviously, it had a lot of diversity. We're talking about your nieces who are coming to visit you and how they inspired your authorship of these books. As you know, currently, there are efforts to ban books and erase the contributions of Black people, women, queer people in American history. What's at stake when books are banned, and what happens when curricula is devoid of Black narratives?
Well, it's horrible, quite frankly, Jade. It's really an injustice.
Mm,
That's what it is, because it erases children, it erases their families. It deprives them of the opportunity to see themselves in books, and it also deprives their peers of the opportunity to learn about people who are different from themselves. I mean, everyone needs this. That's what education is. And I also say at times, it's not the children who have issues with the books, it's the adults. It's
mm,
the adults who don't want to have certain conversations. It's the adults who don't want to, allow children to know the truth. I think it's so funny that there are now people who think that, oh, if you talk about privilege, and specifically white privilege, this is going to make white kids feel guilty and it's not fair. And I think, what about when I was in classrooms and, we talk about slavery? No one was thinking about me and the other Black kids there. I went through school, and students are still reading Huck Finn and To Kill a
mm,
Mockingbird and books with the N word. And when I was an eighth grade teacher, Jade, To Kill a Mockingbird was one of the books in our curriculum. And before we started to read it, I told my students that there's a word in here. It is never to be used in this classroom. It
mm,
is also, even when you're writing responses to the book, and that word comes up, you're to just draw a line, or you can substitute the word Black or African American. But I said, I don't want to hear that word if we're reading sections aloud. I don't want to see it in print. And I let them know. I was honest. I said, if you had a white teacher, that person might not have a problem. And also, if you had a different Black teacher, that person might not have a problem with you using the word. But for me, I don't want to see it, and I don't want to hear it. But again, those things aren't taken into consideration. And I saw something just this week. The American Civil Liberties Union of Indiana, and I actually have it here, so I'm going to read it. It says, A person can decide that they don't want to read a certain book. A person can decide that they don't want their child to read that book, but a person can't decide that an entire school or entire town can't read that book. And that
Mhm.
is so true. I would even question people who make decisions for their children not to read certain books. Why don't you want them to read those books? What is so wrong with that book? What is the problem? You need to ask yourself that, because the issue is more to do with you than it is your child reading a book.
Color of Change has been involved in this fight to protect Black history really for the past 3 or 4 years. And one of the things that we've loved doing is raising money to send books, culturally relevant books, to children all over America. What are some of the ways that you really uplift Black history and Black culture in your books? And why is it so important to you?
So, first of all, I want to thank you and Color of Change for the work you're doing. Even before our conversation today, I've known about your organization, I've contributed to the organization.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm glad to know that. And selfishly, I will say I did not know that you are involved in a campaign to get books into the hands of kids. So I'm certainly hoping that you will consider mine, and that kids will have access to my books. And so why should kids have access to my books? Currently, actually, I don't have what you would consider a typical Black history book. But
Mm,
I do have one. I don't know that I can say the title because it hasn't been announced yet, but I will say that I have written a picture book biography about someone who has not been written about in the children's space. And so I'm looking forward to that book coming out. It's scheduled right now to come out in 2025. So that's someone that I'm uplifting. I've also written another picture book biography that hasn't been sent out yet. And again, another person who they're both about Black women that people either, I don't know how many people know about them. I think some might, but they're definitely people who need to have their stories told. And I have ideas for others. I do have actually a book coming out next year called I See Color, and it's co authored with Kaylee Pugh. And we are celebrating all of the social justice acts that people from different racial groups and different backgrounds have done over the years. So that's a way that I've been uplifting different people in Black history and people who just often aren't uplifted and who people, as I said, need to know about and may not. But there is another angle to Jade, and that is that my current titles are really about just the everyday things that kids and people enjoy doing. And that also counteracts the negative stereotypes that some people have about Black people because it shows us just doing what everyone else does and enjoying it. And kids need to see that. Black kids and kids of color need to see themselves in books doing regular things like dancing, like learning how to ride a bike or playing outside. And other children as well need to see those children doing the same activities that they enjoy. Another thing I do take very specific care to do is I make it very clear, Jade, when one of my books is sold, because if you read the book, like Let's Dance or Together We Ride, Ride, Roll, Run, it could really have any character in it. It's not specific to Black kids, but I'm very clear that these books need to have Black kids in them and brown kids. And so they do. That's one of the things I make very clear. And then I also have an early chapter book that I'm working on that as well has not been sent out yet on submission, but I have certain cultural markers in there. The grandmother, cooks foods that I grew up eating, all these, delicious foods, potato salad and different cakes that she makes and desserts. And so I have that in there. And there are things about her doing the little girl's hair. And so there are things that, I think Black children will relate to when they read that book. So those are some ways that I get that in there.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a problem if the only time Black children are in picture books is when it's about Black history or about, hairstyles or something like that. Black children should be seen in all sorts of books. So thank you for that. Valerie, how have you seen representation affect the way that students learn? Can you share a time where you saw the way representation really impacted a student in your classroom?
Oh my, absolutely. So there are several examples. One was when I was a fifth grade teacher, and we read a book by Lulu de la Cruz, Salsa Stories. And I had several students say to me, "This is the first time I've read a book about my culture or that's similar to my culture." And the Latinx students, or Latino and Latina students, were so excited that they said, can we do like a special celebration at the end and have our parents bring in food and so forth? And that's what we did. And they brought in music. And it was just such a wonderful experience for everyone. But I think that is so, so important. Some things that have occurred even when I was reading Let's Dance to audiences, there was a young girl who said, "Oh, she's wearing what my mother wears. There's a dancer in a hijab."
Mm.
So she noticed that. The other thing that was quite interesting, and I was reading the book to a group of sixth graders. It was a crowded media center, and people might say, "Well, why were you reading to a picture book to sixth graders?" First of all, anyone can enjoy a picture book, but the media specialist there had set it up because that's one of the schools where, I do instructional coaching. So they wanted to support me, and a lot of the kids knew me. And in one picture, there is a boy in a wheelchair, and I had specifically requested that. I was talking about the story behind the story, and I said the reason I wanted a boy in a wheelchair is because I had been at the wedding of a former student, and her cousin was there, and he has cerebral palsy, and he was in a wheelchair, and he was in the middle of the dance floor just doing his thing. He was back in his wheelchair, and he was moving it side to side like this. And his aunt, who's my student's mother, was dancing with him. And it was the most beautiful thing to see. And so this boy raises his hand and he says, "I have cerebral palsy." Now, he was not in a wheelchair, but Jade, I thought, how many times has he read a book with a character who has cerebral palsy? And again, in my book, you see a boy in a wheelchair, you wouldn't necessarily connect it to cerebral palsy, but because I was there and I was able to be in conversation with the students, and I was able to tell them the inspiration behind that illustration, he received that information, and it obviously touched him in such a way that he would raise his hand and want to share that and make that connection. So that to me is just, I mean, it just warms my heart and to hear that. And this is why I write, because I never know who my books are going to touch and in what ways. And then that they're being touched comes back to me and touches me.
Thank you so much for that, Valerie. It's incredible to hear about the thought and intention and care that you put into your books and how you put the experiences that you've had in the classroom and in real life into those books as well.
Thank you.
If you are a parent and would like to take action or learn more about Color of Change's Black history work to protect Black history, you can visit colorofchange.org to support our campaigns. Color of Change has been leading the fight to push back against the right wing and conservative attacks on Black history. Everything from getting the CEO of Disney to stand against the Don't Say Gay bill that was being pushed out in Florida, to talking to educational materials companies like College Board and asking them to come out against Ron DeSantis and in favor of Black history. I know that as an educator, you have fought attacks by right wings and conservatives. What happened, and how did you get through that experience?
Yeah, it was tough. It's continued to be tough. So that the particular experience I believe you're referring to, though I could tell you a number of others that have occurred as well in my
Mhm.
school district. But last year I was actually, it was the year before, I was doing an event at a library. I was asked to be the sort of featured author there. And I was shown in a picture with one of the presenters. Actually, he was one of the people who sponsored it. And I mean, I don't think he would mind me saying his name, Michael Ian Black, who is an actor and comedian. And there was a parent who saw it and claimed that he was a pedophile. She found some tweets of his from 12 years ago, which he's a comedian. So he's going to say things that, don't jive with everyone. That's what comedians do. But there was absolutely no evidence and no truth to the fact that this is who he is. So, in the span of 2 months between September and October, she sent 5 emails to the superintendent, to the board of ed, to the first selectman of the town, all these, where I teach, basically saying I shouldn't be employed. Like, if your employee does this, she hangs around with, a pedophile. And oh, Jade, wait for this one. And she is not president. At the time, I was actually co-chair, but she said, and she chairs a DEI committee for, wait for it, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. Oh, the horror, right? So, I mean, you have to laugh to keep from crying. So this was going on and on and on. Did I get support from the district? Not really. The superintendent wrote a letter which she called me to her office to see. She didn't even want to send it to me. She gave me a printed copy. And when I left, I gave it back to her and she recycled it. But she asked me if I wanted her to send it. And I said to her, not if that's what you plan to send, because
Mhm.
it wasn't anything about how dare you do this? How dare you come at one of our most respected teachers, educators? I've been named a distinguished teacher in the district. I had been, as I said, coaching teachers for more than a decade. And this is how you treat me, or, you treat this person. But no, it was more like, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We've looked into the matter. Michael Ian Black is not a pedophile. Valerie Bowling is not, a racist. So, that kind of thing. But there was no like cease and desist, stop this. Um,
That's one of the most insidious sort of things that we've seen happen from the right is that is the naming of people as pedophiles when they stand in favor of Black history or stand in favor of queer history. When the Don't Say Gay bill was being passed in Florida, the way that it was actually messaged to parents in Florida, which is totally untrue, was that there were teachers who wanted to teach their kindergartners about sexual education. And we know that that's not true. We know that it's an effort from Governor Ron DeSantis and the conservatives in Florida to ban any mention of queer people from the classroom. And the reason that they do that, the reason that they want to ban Black history and queer history and women's history from the classroom is that if it's discussed and normalized in the classroom, people won't have shame around their identities. And when they don't have shame around their identities, they're able to stand up and fight back. And so, what I've really seen is that they want us to be ashamed.
Hmm.
Um, and the naming of you, a educator of 30 years, as a pedophile or pedophile enabler is just a way to shut down the conversation. Obviously, nobody wants their children around anyone like that. But we know that it's just a way to control and manipulate the conversation in a way that is so below the belt, it's hard to even define it.
Yeah. And you say, Jade, that they want people to feel ashamed. And that's part of it. But I think even more is they want certain people to be silenced and even
Mhm.
more erased. Like,
Mhm.
you don't count, you don't deserve to be here. So let's just get rid of you, which is absolutely horrible. So how I got through it is, just my own strength and having support of family and friends. I really didn't feel supported by the school district. In fact, I won 3 awards last year, one of which, as you know, from NEA led to our connection today. And they will not even acknowledge me for those awards because one was an Excellence in Equity Award from the State Education Resource Center in
Mhm.
Connecticut. And the other two were Education Association awards from Connecticut Education Association and National Education Association that were Human and Civil Rights Awards. So the Susan B. Anthony and Prudence Crandall Award for CEA, and then the H. Council Trenholm Award for NEA. So it's definitely been it's been a challenge. But on the positive end, my union has been supportive. And so shout out to GEA. And they, a number of teachers, including my husband, who's in the district, showed up at a Board of Ed meeting in large numbers to support not just me, but other teachers who faced attacks. And then it was our vice president who actually nominated me for those awards that I
Mhm.
won. And that was her way of saying, oh, so they want to come at you this way. Well, I'm going to take it from another angle, which was so clever and counterintuitive because it's sort of the same with books, actually, as we were talking about before. We don't want to see just Black people in these trauma books. Like, for every trauma book, you need to read, even if you're reading just as an adult, something about trauma. I know that I went through a period where I was reading a lot of books about the Holocaust. And you need to balance that with, some light, joy, frivolous beach reading or whatever. So again, her response to this trauma I was experiencing was, we should celebrate you. You deserve to be celebrated for all you've done.
Absolutely. And it seems like you've gotten so much support from NEA, from your union. What
Yes.
what have been the benefits for you of it being a member of the National Education Association? Of course, they showed up for you in a time of need and you were supported by other educators. But what has your union membership really meant to you?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that. It's really meant a lot that when I've had something that I've been going through, I know I can reach out to others for support. I know, there are certain bills that, are on the table right now. They're even looking at, trying to get credit for teachers who taught through, the 2 years of COVID and so forth, even though we're still, experiencing COVID. Our union president is actually going to the Capitol building today to speak. So it's really, it's having a community where everyone's an educator, everyone's in this together, and just having, knowing that that support is there. And also, even for, other teachers who, when there's a shortage of staff and teachers are being called to cover for their colleagues, which of course anyone is willing to help out, occasionally, but when it becomes a pattern and it's happening all the time, they are on top of that. They're keeping track of that data, and so that teachers can, maybe get paid extra or something. So it's good to have that support and have people who know, even legally, what can happen and what cannot happen. So that is, it's been so good during this experience to have the support of my union behind me, especially when, as I said, I do not feel that I had the support of the district.
What's one piece of advice that you would share with an educator who's being targeted for teaching accurate Black history?
Keep teaching it. You owe it to your students. Students need to know the truth. They need to know what really happened. Um, and I would hope that you would have a district who would support you. I mean, if you're not doing anything wrong, like I wasn't doing anything wrong. So the one thing I will say I'm so happy about, I never for a minute, and maybe it was naive of me, but I never felt my job was in jeopardy because I knew that I had done nothing wrong. And at least that is something that, the district, the superintendent and the head of HR at the time did say, Valerie, you don't have to worry about your job. So that at least I will say, that I took comfort in. But I do think that educators just need to, it's so important that they keep doing what they're doing. But I think also if you have other people in your school and in your grade level team who feel similarly, and you're sort of banding together so you're not out there on your own, that does make it a bit easier. But what I worry about, Jade, is that there's so much fear now, and I understand it. And because of that fear, people are pulling back from lessons, wonderful lessons that they used to teach, and that saddens me.
What advice do you have for Black parents who are really looking to ensure their children have access to relevant and accurate history?
I think that they're their child's and their children's first teacher. So they need to really be the ones to have those conversations and share those stories, even sharing their family stories and
Mm.
sharing other stories that they feel are important to share. I think our local libraries are great resources if you want librarians to make recommendations of books. I think that taking children to museums, certain museums, to learn more about themselves and their history. There are even some games, I think, that, some Black history games that you can play together. So I think those are just some of the things that parents can do. But I think it's really the reading and just the experiences and the conversation.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I want to share that at Color of Change this summer, we're going to be training parents to actually speak up at schools and school board meetings. If the schools are only hearing from the parents who don't want Black history taught, that is a problem. And so we're going to be coming together with our squads all across the country. We're going to be training parents, parents of all races, but particularly Black parents, to go in and stand up for Black history, women's history, queer history, and all marginalized identities in the classroom.
Yes, being your child's number one advocate. And that does mean that if your child tells you something happened at school, or it
Mhm.
isn't feeling comfortable or isn't feeling a sense of belonging, that you look into that and you have a conversation with the teacher. I always say go to the teacher first. You don't need to go straight to an administrator because you would want that same respect. And also, the administrator is going to go to the teacher anyway. But definitely have a conversation. Don't, go in with an open mind to listen. But really do that. Be an advocate for your child. Yes, attend school board meetings as well. Don't be afraid to challenge things and to speak up and show up at the great events. You may have to take off time from work, but showing up to your child's class as a guest reader or attending events at school, PTA meetings when you can, the more you're involved and the more people see you around, people are going to care about and watch out for your child.
Valerie, what is the self-assessed classroom library? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. In terms of the classroom library equity audit, or it's a self assessment of a classroom library, but it can also be in a media center. And it has questions about how many of your books, how many of the books in this library have main characters of color, or even more specifically, main characters with very dark skin, or main characters who are bilingual or multilingual, or immigrants, or LGBTQIA+, etc. So this is a way to go through and check for what sorts of books are in your classroom. And I've had people use this and they're very surprised because it's literally a checklist,
Wow.
and they were finding that they weren't able to check off a number of the categories, and that's a clue that you need to have a more diverse selection of books.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I
Sure.
cannot wait to tell my fellow parents and family members about this tool. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Valerie, what advice do you have for students and authors who are also looking to ensure that access to relevant and accurate history in schools remains?
Sure. So, first of all, for authors, I will say keep writing your stories and
Mm,
write stories that only you can tell. So, this is very important. For instance, I did, for Black History Month, I did some shout outs on social media, and I posted book covers of picture books. And I was very intentional about the picture books I chose. I chose books that were in some way related to Black history. So they were telling us either about a person or an event, something that Black people and all people should know about or be reminded of. And each book had both a Black author and illustrator.
mm,
Our books about us and our stories are not written by us. And that really needs to change. And that is true no matter what you're writing about. You don't get to write about center a queer kid as the main character if you don't have that same background yourself.
mm,
You don't get to write about a kid from Guatemala if you're not a kid or an adult from Guatemala. We want people to tell their own stories. So keep writing, but make sure the stories you're telling are your own. And if you do have other characters, get a sensitivity reader, sensitivity readers to make sure that even for secondary characters, you're giving an accurate portrayal. In terms of to my students, I love my young people. I really do. That's why I've been an educator for all these years. That's why I write for you. And my advice for you is to keep reading, keep writing, and keep learning, and use your voice to speak up for things that you know are wrong, whether they're happening to you or to someone else. Do not be afraid to do that. We need you. We need your voice, and we need you to feel empowered and just magnificent, which is exactly who you are.
This year's Black History Now Awards celebrated educators, activists, and thought leaders working to protect accurate Black history in classrooms. We are so honored to make a special Black History Now award presentation to Valerie Bowling.
An award-winning educator and author, Valerie Bowling has built her 30-year career championing underserved voices and experiences. She currently serves as an instructional coach, where she collaborates with teachers on implementing a variety of instructional strategies designed to increase student performance. When Valerie taught elementary school students, she found it difficult to find books that represented her students' diverse cultural experiences and racial identities, so she authored them. Today, with 7 titles under her belt, her hard work has paid off. In addition to winning the 2021 New England Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators Crystal Kite Award, she is also a recipient of the NEA's 2022 H. Council Trenholm Memorial Award. We are thrilled to present her with the 2023 Black History Now Award, the Elizabeth Duncan Kuntz Award for Racial and Social Justice in Education. Please welcome Ms. Valerie Bowling.
It is an honor to receive the Elizabeth Duncan Kuntz Award for Racial and Social Justice in Education. Ms. Kuntz was a national figure in education, civil rights, and the women's movement. Throughout her career, she pushed for equality of gender and race. Most notably, she was director of the United States Department of Labor Women's Bureau and the first African American president of the National Education Association. In her acceptance speech for NEA president, she asked educators to make use of their united power to bring about change. This is what I strive to do in my life's work as an educator and author. I want to bring about positive change. I speak up for students and also encourage them to use their own voices to advocate for themselves. I make sure they have access to a curriculum in which they can see themselves reflected and also learn about others. And I write books that feature children from diverse backgrounds. I will continue to do this equity work because our children deserve nothing less. All of them, including those who are often marginalized, deserve to be seen and heard, valued, and validated. I want to thank NEA and Color of Change for this award, which I share with my fellow educators who ensure that all children feel welcome in their classrooms.
Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to our partners over at the National Education Association, and of course, Ms. Valerie Bowling for joining us in this 5th installment of the Black History Now live series. And be sure to go to Color of Change's YouTube channel to watch prior episodes in the series and check out our 2023 Black History Now Awards. The Black History Now live series and award show honors Black leaders and educators who are fighting to preserve truth in education and push back on national far-right and conservative efforts to ban books and erase Black history. This episode was produced in partnership with the National Education Association, a funder and partner of Color of Change.